In the beginning, there was nothing until there was light. That's what we're going to be learning in this video. Lighting, all about lighting in Blender. So we're going to start by going over the different types of lamps that there are in Blender, and then addressing all the different things that can emit and create light in Blender. And then we're going to be, demonstrating how to create a pleasing lighting setup on our little donut scene here. Plus, if you stick to the end of this video as something completely random to end on, I'll show you how you can soup up your donut so that it's got some cool underglow lighting so that you don't get laughed out of the underground donut racing circuit. So if you've been following along at home, then what you'll have so far is, you've got our donut. It's got some sprinkles on it, as from the last part, and everything else is set up nicely. Oh, and your background scene would be a little gray color like this. Now, throughout this video, I've maybe referenced this lamp here. I almost called it a ramp, like my wife would. She's Korean. I've been referencing this lamp here, and I've been saying like, make sure that it's over the donut or whatever so that you can actually see it. But beyond that, we haven't really spoken about lighting, and we've just been keeping this thing here. So this is the default lamp that comes with Blender. Like if you open up a new scene in Blender, it has this little lamp here. So that's a good jumping off point. Let's talk about what this lamp is. So this lamp, if you go to the panel over here, which is this little lamp panel, it'll only appear, by the way, if you actually select a lamp object, obviously. So if you've got something else, you won't be able to see it. But here you can see that you've got a number of settings: size, max bounces, strength, color, etc. And then you've got at the top here, you've got a number of different types here. And these, by the way, are the same types that you would see if you hit Shift A and then went down here where it says lamp. You can add in these specific types here, but you can also change it after the fact. So if you added in a sun lamp and then went, oh no, I actually need an area lamp, you can do that later on as well. So this lamp is called a point lamp, and it's it's just a common, simple lamp, and it means that it is lighting in all directions. So it's like there's a little tiny ball of light, a little lamp. It's a little bulb essentially, and it is lighting in all directions. So if you had the mug for some reason floating up in the atmosphere, it would be getting light the same as the light that is hitting on the ground there, right? Yay for us. Now, the different other types of lamps, you've got a sun lamp. Now, if you turn on sun lamp like this, you are blinded by how bright everything is. And that's because the sun lamp uses a different strength unit, I guess, than other lamps. So if you switch from a point lamp to a sun lamp, it's crazy. Like generally, you don't really go above 5 for a sun lamp. So if you switch to sun, it's extremely bright. But anyway, so usually like if you've got a sun lamp, you would move things around like this. Now, a sun lamp is very different to other types of lamps in Blender because it's the only lamp where it doesn't actually matter where it is in your scene. Everything will be hit by the light evenly. So to prove my point, let me just drag this across here. If I actually positioned this sun lamp underneath the plane, you'll see that nothing actually changes. The lighting is identical. If I moved it over to there, nothing changes. If I move it to the other side, nothing changes. The only way that you would actually affect the light is if you change the rotation. Okay? And again, I can position this absolutely anywhere. It really doesn't matter. The sun lamp is treated like it's globally affected. So in your entire scene, everything is going to be hit with the same angle, the same rotation of that lamp. So think of it like, and the reason for this is that that's the sun. Like the sun, what am I going to explain here? The sun, like it doesn't taper off. Like if you position something really closely to the lamp right there, you wouldn't have like a bigger shadow, right? Generally speaking. Actually, is this even the right explanation for it? But it's unique in the fact that, yeah, it doesn't matter where it is, okay? So it's treated like it is a global lamp. So generally, like if I'm, making a scene or something, I might just have like the lamp over to the side or something like this, just out of the way, because it doesn't actually matter. And it also reminds me that, whether or not my objects are directly in line with this little line here, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the light that's going to be hitting it. Hope that helps. The next one is a spot lamp. So a spot lamp is it's most similar to, I guess, a point lamp. Let me just increase the size again, because again, just like before, the spot lamp uses a similar energy range. So if I switch to a spot lamp, you can see the difference there. So a point lamp, that's the brightness of it. Spot lamp's the same brightness, but it's now limited to whatever is in range of this beam here. Okay, so a spot lamp has a number of uses. Like it's generally used, like say for example, I was making this scene and I had 2 lamps. One of them was this point lamp here, giving maybe an overall light to the scene. But I maybe wanted a little bit of extra light on this donut here, right? Well, maybe I could position a spot lamp just over it, just giving a little bit of extra light just on the donut there. So that's an example, but it allows you to light something in your scene without it interacting with everything else. So you could position it like way off there. I could turn the angle of that spot lamp like way down there. Something like that. So that's an example of the spot lamp. Some other settings that you get, obviously, first of all, you get the size of the beam, the size of this spot lamp there. Let me delete that one. You also get blend. So the higher you set that blend to, the more feathered the edge of that spot lamp is going to appear, like that. And also, if you want to see how it interacts with the other objects of the scene, you can check show cone. And now you'll see like a beam that appears, and you'll be able to see exactly which parts of your mesh it's now interacting with. So there's that. Then you also have Hemi. Now Hemi is really only there because it used to be involved in the old Blender internal render engine. Cycles doesn't really support Hemi lamps, and you can see here it says it's not supported. It's interpreted as a sun lamp. So it's exactly the same as if you used sun. So I don't use Hemi. I used to, maybe in the Blender internal, but not anymore. The last one is the area lamp. And this is a very, very common one. It allows you to set a lamp and treat it as if it is a block, like an actual space, like a window, for example. So with this here, like I could increase the size of my area lamp here. I'll turn down my energy value to something lower. And now it's like, and if I pull it down there, you can see how it's sort of like cutting into the plane there. You can see it's sort of being treated like if you had a, like this thing, like off the size of my, am I going to get it in the shot? This giant light here, right? So it's sort of being treated like it's a big, giant light box, for example. So that's a really good one there as well. So with each of these settings, we've spoken about, so the strength is obviously pretty easy to understand. It's the strength of the light, so I don't have to really explain that one to you. But size, so you've got a value here that says size, and you wouldn't really think that a size would have much of a difference because, we're not dealing with a mesh which can get bigger or smaller like that. It's the size of a lamp, so why would you need to have a size? Because you'll notice if you increase this here, nothing actually changes. But you'll notice, if you zoom in here, that something is actually changing. So the smaller, and for some reason I'm in metric units, I'll just set that to none so you can see. You'll notice that the smaller that you go, the sharper the shadow becomes. So as I set this smaller and smaller, you can see that I can actually now make out the sprinkles in my shadow there. So you get sharper and sharper shadows the lower you go. Okay, and then the higher you go, the smoother it becomes. So you can see now I can barely even make out the edge of my donut there as I go up to like 1 or 2. Okay, now this is used for very different things. So if I was making, say, like a brick wall, okay, and I wanted to put the emphasis on the texture, the bumps across the wall, and the real detail in the mortar and stuff like that. Well, I would maybe use a really small size value so that I can bring out the detail in that edge there and really get, and you'll notice like look at the sprinkles there. Like you can really, like, they start to become separated and they're each individual thing. So it's really contrasted. But then as you set it higher, they all become sort of smoothed out. So generally if you're creating a character or a car or something like that, you would use a high size value so that you get a very smooth fall off. So photographers, when they're photographing someone, like this size lamp here, like they would get a really huge light, like giant light box, because the larger your light source, the smoother your fall off, and so you don't get these harsh lines in the face. So it's essentially it's the exact representation of that. This size value here is like you've got a box of light and you're making it bigger and bigger. So if you've ever noticed, like if you sit next to a big window, like if you're in an airport, those giant windows, like if you look at people's faces, they're very smooth. You can't really notice the wrinkles or the eye pockets and things like that because it's such a smooth light, because it's so huge that you're not really you're not really seeing those shadows. Whereas if you stood in front of, say, a single light bulb and maybe positioned it above the roof there, or a halogen bulb, for example, a downlight, it really brings out the harsh shadows in your eyes and things like that. It's actually one of the biggest mistakes that so many houses are affected with, is that people put downlights over couches. It's a little tip here. You should never do that, because a halogen downlight is it's the smallest light source, so it's the most pronounced at like bringing out shadows. And because you sit on couches, if you want to have a conversation with people, you're just looking into everybody's darkness of their eyes like that, and it's awful. You don't actually want that. So you should never put a downlight over a couch where you're going to be sitting and talking with people. It's the worst thing. You want to have soft light. So actually, if you aim lights at the ceiling, sometimes called alcove lighting, or what's the other one? Wall sconces, that creates a huge light source across the ceiling, and then that makes smooth lighting on your faces. Anyways, that was a tangent. So coming back to the lamps here, okay, so I just wanted to express that this size value here, and it's the same across every lamp type as well. You'll always see this size here. So for the sun, for example, like if it's midday sun, you generally see something like this, like a 0.01 or 0.02. That's like midday sun. And then if it's like becoming in the afternoon, or if it's overcast, then you would increase that size amount there to create a softer shadow. Same thing with the spotlight. I'll put that back up to 500, whatever it was before. Oh, that's too much, I think. Not 5,000, 500. And then the area lamp, you can actually make out the size of it like there. If you increase that size, you can see that actually becomes bigger in the viewport as well. Okay, so those are lamps, right? Lamps. Now, that's just one area that you can actually add lighting in Blender. There are actually two others. So first we have lamps. We also have world lighting. And then the third one I'll show you is mesh lighting, okay? Or actually, yeah, okay. So we'll do world lighting first. So if you've been following so far, you probably haven't changed your default world lighting here. So if you went to the world panel over here, you would see that you have a color which is completely gray. Let me just hide this lamp here by hitting H. So this here, if I increase this to white, you can see that it's actually contributing lighting to the scene. And if you click on use nodes, by the way, then you can actually, you've got a strength value there as well, and you can increase or decrease that. Now you might think, looking at this, like, oh, this is cool. Now it looks like one of those, wherever they've got a person on TV selling something against a white backdrop. Everything is completely white around them, like in the Matrix. They're in that huge white area. You think like, oh, it looks kind of cool like that, but this actually washes out the entire scene. And the reason is what this is actually doing right now is it's creating an infinite amount of tiny light sources around the entire scene, and they're all contributing at an exact equal amount. This white area, they're all pointing inward. So it would be like as if you made a lamp like this, and then you like duplicated it. Oh, they're so tiny and you wouldn't even see it. Let me just to quickly demonstrate. It would be like you did this, okay? And you just went around the scene and but to the most infantile degree. So you won't actually see any direction in the lighting. Oh, that's a terrible example. That's not at all what I meant to demonstrate. But I hope that sort of, I hope it kind of makes sense what I'm trying to say here. So a world lighting, it can be used for some interesting uses. Like say you added a sun lamp, right? You got a sun lamp like this, and you wanted to have some sun lighting in your scene. So you set this to sun, set that to maybe 4. You set the size pretty low. You got sun lamp, but the other part of outdoor lighting that people often forget is that it's not just the sun that's contributing light. You've also got the sky itself, and the sky is blue. So if you look at photos or you go outside and look at people, you'll see that the sun is yellowishy tint, and it's very bright and it's hitting their face. But in the shadows, you can make out a slight blue tint. So if you set the world settings here to a bluish color and set the strength to something a little low, maybe something like this, now you can see that those shadows now have this blue tint to it. So that's an example of how you could use the world lighting. So you never want to use the world lighting so that it is, it's your primary light source. You never want to have something like this. No matter how cool you might think it looks, it's completely washing out the scene, zero contrast, and it's never a good idea. But in combination with other light sources, it can actually be a good thing. Okay, so that is world lighting. And then the final type of lighting that I would, before we move on to the next type, I should also mention that as well as just a flat color like this, you can also have a texture contribute to the lighting. So there's a very common type of light source called HDRs. So HDRs are 360-degree photographs taken of an area. So what they generally do for movies is they would, if they've got Chris Pratt on screen for the Guardians of the Galaxy and he's outdoors and he's talking to Groot, well, if they want to make the lighting of Groot match Chris Pratt, before the shot, they'll get I got a friend who works at the industry, and he's actually called the ball guy. And he goes out there and he stands on set like before and after the shoot, and they take a photo of this chrome ball which he holds from different angles, and it captures a 360-degree photograph of the entire environment. The ground, the lighting, gets the clouds in the exact right position, the sun in the exact right position, and it looks identical. So that when you then put in Groot, they don't even have to fiddle with any of these lamps here. They just put in the HDR and it works. So an HDR, I'll just show you very quickly. This isn't really part of the tutorial, so I don't really want you to follow along. But if you had an HDR on hand and you wanted to add it in Blender, you would, in this node editor here, which by the way, again, I went to node editor, you would go Shift A, texture, and then environment texture, not an image texture, but an environment texture. And then you would select your HDR. So these are examples of HDRs here. And you would just add this in right here and then add that to the color input of your emission of the world here. Okay. So what is going on? Have I got, oh, I think I set that. Okay. Oh, that's the thing. So you got to go to the world panel settings. I was looking at the lamp settings. Okay. So let's just do that again. Environment texture. And then I'll just use this one, clear EXR. And now you can see. So now I've got a 360-degree shot of this outdoor scene here. Let me just remove my lamp. And you can see the effect that has, okay? It actually looks pretty washed out because this HDR, because it's the shadow isn't as harsh as it should be. So generally what I would do is I would add a math node and I would tweak the multiply amount Again, you don't have to do that. I'm just going through this very quickly so you could see how I would do this. And then I would set this to add, and that would be like the sky lighting. So this is an example of HDR lighting. So actually, and this is just to, like, if you're thinking like, oh man, how do you actually find HDRs and sky HDRs and things like that? They are kind of difficult. Like, you can find some free ones online. I found that they're generally, here and there sort of quality. But I actually created a add-on for Blender called Pro Lighting Skies, which you can get from Blender Guru. And it basically gives you a thumbnail view like this, where you can just click, select a type, and it'll add it into the background there like that. And so then you can like cycle through and just choose the different things. So that is HDR lighting, and that's sort of how it works in Blender. So the third and the final type of lighting that we'll talk about is mesh lighting. And that means basically converting any object into a source of light. So for example, we could make this cup here a source of light. If we went to the material panel over here, and if I just deleted that material, gave it a new material, and then for the shader, like remember we talked about shaders, diffuse for flat and gloss for shiny things. Well, there's a type of shader called emission, which I believe I added as a fun thing at the end of an old tutorial. But if you set it to emission, this now becomes a light source, like that. And look, it's now shining. It's a blue, it's a green, glowing cup. So that is another type of lighting. So you might be asking, like, all right, well, what's a real world example? All right, well, you can create a plane like this, give it a emission thing, and now this becomes like a studio lighting setup. Like, this is now a light box, right? And so I could go into this view mode and like increase this or whatever. And if you wanted to change the size of the shadows, like instead of there being that size value like you had with the lamps, you can increase the size of your plane, and that is now having that effect of, it's real, like accuracy, like you would see in the real world. The shadows now become softer because of that. So one advantage to using a physical mesh light is that sometimes, like if you're making a car, for example, which is heavily shiny, like let's just add in a monkey here as an example. Well, if you've got a completely reflective object, well, often if you had a lamp, right? If I had a lamp here, I might make this like this. Well, you'll see that it doesn't actually show up in the reflection of your objects. Like if it was a little bit rough, you might see a slight little bit of specularness, but you wouldn't actually see it because the lamp is really invisible to reflections. It'll show up in highlights and things like that, but it's otherwise it's invisible. But a real mesh light, on the other hand, does show up. So for highly reflective objects, sometimes you might want to use a mesh lamp. So there's a few pros and cons and things like that. If this is like, you're like, oh no, now I have to think about if I should use a mesh light or a lamp or world lighting or whatever. You'll pick it up as you go. I don't want to overwhelm you with so much stuff. Like if you just want to start with lamps, that's the best place to do. And that's really what we're going to do for this scene. So yeah, let's get into it. So let's talk about creating the lighting for our scene here. So the first thing you want to do before you start lighting is actually lock down the camera position, because if you started doing lighting, right, and you had your view like in this area here, and you started adding a lamp over here like this, you set up everything in this view over here, right? And then later on, you realize like, oh, actually, I want to have the camera in this position. Well, that's a completely different lighting setup, right? So the light is very much related to where the camera is positioned, just like as it would be in the real world. Like a photographer wouldn't, start by setting up the lighting and then go, now where do I want to put the camera? Like camera is really the first thing you want to think about. So positioning the camera, right? Let's talk about that. So the camera is this thing right here. And we've spoken about how if you go into number pad 0, that puts you through the eyes of the camera. Now you could go into, like, if you want to change the position, you could, go into top view and rotate it and position it where you want. But then you're sort of going in this view like this, and you're moving about, and it's kind of a little flimsy. So what I like to do instead is I like to have my view, like say I'm in, like, looking at it from this view right here. Say I've got the perfect view and I'm looking through the place I want to see. If you hit Control Alt number pad 0, it will now move the camera to that exact position that you're looking through. So that's a little shortcut I like to use. Again, you can get the keyboard shortcut guide if you don't want to have to remember all these little shortcuts. So that's what I did. Then when you're looking through the eyes of the camera with number pad 0, you want to just very slightly like adjust like the rotate, or like where you're actually pointing to. And so you can do that by hitting R. Now, if you just hit R and move, it'll actually tilt the camera, which isn't very useful. But if you hit R and then middle mouse button, you're then changing where it is pointing to. Now, it's a little like sporadic, what's the word? Sensitive. So if you hold down Shift, it'll move it in smaller increments. Excuse me. And that shift value, by the way, I should say, like, it's applicable everywhere in Blender. So if you're moving a cup, hold down Shift, it's going to move it slower. If you're rotating, it's going to move it slower. If you're tweaking a value, hold down Shift, it'll move it slower. So Shift is a very important one, right? Anyways, so we've got it sort of around we want. Also, if I want to zoom in, like move the camera forwards or backwards, I could hit G and then middle mouse button. And now I'm what's called like dolly. Is that dolly? Dolly. Yeah, this is dolly. Like physically moving the camera forwards or backwards. So anyway, so I'll just position this where I want. I just hit G and Z and that'll lower the camera. So position it wherever you want. Just have a look at your scene. Where do you want to put your camera? You don't have to do it exactly the way I am, but yeah, that's where I'm doing it right now. Okay, cool. Now, for lighting, I'm making sure that my world settings are just going to be 0, right? Black, 0. Because if you have it set to the default settings of Blender, which is this gray color, you can see that gray color is contributing a small amount of lighting to everything in Blender. It won't be much, it won't be, too bad, but it'll mean that you won't get like harsh contrast, like the shadows will always be a little bit washed out. So just make sure that your strength is set to 0 or a black color. Okay, so start with adding one lamp, just one lamp. So let's do that. Hit Shift A and then lamp, and let's go area. Okay, now the reason I'm using area is that area is a nice one because it allows you a bit more control. Like if you add a point lamp, then everything in the entire scene is going to be lit all the way around it. But because I want to like sort of choose which parts of my scene have more lighting, I'm going to go with area. Spot is a little bit too restrictive because it's on like this sort of cone angle, which doesn't give you a sort of too much control. But I like area because it sort of emulates like a photographer, like having a light box, okay? So I've added in the area lamp here, and I'm just going to increase the size to something nice, and that'll give me some nice soft shadows. So let's split the view here. I'll go into rendered view, and I'll just increase the size there. So I'll need to obviously increase the strength of the light as well. Okay. So something like that. So I want these nice soft shadows because I want, like generally like soft shadows make things look more gracious and relaxed, which is why characters, by the way, they look better, especially if it's a girl character, because things look softer with softer lighting. You look sort of more smoother and things like that. So if you had like harsher, little things like this scene becomes like gritty and like look at those sprinkles. So I want to give it some soft lighting, so that's why I'm going with this. And I'm going to rotate this because I want to try. Now this is just like free thinking, like as I'm doing this. Like when you make a scene, just just go through it as you want, but I'm just sort of planning ahead. I want this to look like it's like a table. And it's like morning, so you've got this nice sort of orangey glow lighting, and it's a table, and maybe it's next to a window. So how do you create lighting that looks like it's from a window? Well, you want to make this light best look like a window. So for that, I just want to make it completely vertical. Okay, so I'm just going to set the First of all, I'll set the rotation so that it's completely pointed down, and then I'll hold down rotate in the front view, and hold down Control while I rotate so that it locks it in 5-degree increments. Not sure if I spoke about that. But again, Control, just like Shift, is used everywhere throughout Blender. So I can hold down Control here, and now I'm moving in, 1 increments. G, I'm now moving in like locked sort of grid view. So Control and Shift, they're great for when you're moving things or changing values. Okay, that is pretty good. Okay, so I need to now increase the strength of this because it's looking a little dull. Okay, and I'll just move it a little bit forward so that the light is just sort of hitting the front just a little bit more than it was before. And also I can see the light is sort of falling, like you can see where the light's sort of falling off against the table there. So I'll move the light just a little bit back and I'll pull it upwards a little bit, and let's increase the strength of that some more and a little bit more. Now, how do you know how bright you want to go? Well, you want to make sure, for one, that you don't go so bright that your values are getting blown out. So if I set this to 5,000, you'll see that this cup here and the plate and even the donut, it has areas where you're actually losing information. Like that is now becoming a solid white color. And if you brought it into Photoshop or something like that and moused over the values, you would see that it becomes one solid value, like the value of 1. And that is not good. That's losing range. So you never want to have that. So never go so bright that you're losing value. I like to just sort of go as bright as I can until I'm losing value. So something about this, like that looks pretty good to me. That's a nice value. And then I want it to look a little bit like it's morning sun. So I'll give it a slight orangey, maybe too much. Okay, something like that. Okay, so this is one light source. Now, this is a good way of working. You want to add lights as you need them. You never want to get into, and this is a very poor habit that you can develop if you're not careful, and it's just adding lights without thought. So some people, and this is what I used to do, is just go like, all right, I want to add a light here, and I'll add another light here. And I know I want another light sort of at the front, so I'll add another light at the front. And this just gets a very poor habit because you don't have control over it. And now I don't really know which one to tweak if I want to turn down the brightness. Like these lights, they don't really have a role. Like you generally want to give a role to each light, like a purpose. The light has to be there to do something. And if I'm just adding lights at the start, just sort of dishing them out like a rapper, making it rain, it's not going to have control. So don't get into the habit. Add light when you need it. So I know, looking at this, that these shadows on the right here are way too dark. So I know that I need a light on the other side. So I'm going to duplicate my main area light here because I like area lights. I'm going to use that on the other side as well. And I'll position it over here. And this one is going to be, there's several names you could give it. A kicker, a fill light, a secondary light, something like that, but not as strong as the key light. Good lighting schemes generally have one key light source. And positioning it on the side, by the way, is much better than positioning it on the front. If you position a light source from the front, you can see it looks like a camera flash, and you lose the volume, the shape of your objects because you don't have shadow. Shadow is actually very important for lighting. Like, it's not just about the light, it's about the shadow that the lighting is actually creating. So don't forget that. So shadow is equally as important, if not more than the actual light, because this shadow along that edge there, the part of the donut that's in shadow, is revealing that it is a donut. So don't forget that. Anyways, okay. So I got my key light. Now I want to have this kicker light on this side. So this one is going to be more subtle. So I'm going to increase the size of that to something like 15. So we don't get really harsh shadows at all. Maybe even 20, like that. And I'll turn down the strength of it. And you'll notice, by the way, I've hidden my main source here because, and this is another really good tip, when you're making lighting setups, you work on each light independently. So I know, looking at this, I want to sort of just brighten up the shadows here. So I'm just giving a little bit of light, and I want to emulate the look of, like, because it's a room that's being lit by a window, there would also be a very subtle amount of skylight, like blue light that leaks in through a window with the sun. Or, the sun is there, and either way, there's a bit of blue light that would come into a room. So I'm making it a little bit blue, like this. And now I'll bring back my main light, and look at that. So it's starting to have like a realistic feel to it. Okay, that's pretty cool. Now, another thing, this isn't really to do with lighting, although it will contribute a little bit, is that there should be a wall behind my table here. Like, you never want to just have a black background because that's always a dead giveaway that it's a render. So you don't want to just have a black background. So I'm going to add in a plane here. I'll rotate it by 90 degrees by hitting R and then holding down Control. Scale that up. And this now becomes a wall. I don't even have to give a material to this. I mean, I could if I wanted, but it's not going to make any difference. It's just a diffuse. And this will just very slightly bounce some of the light off this wall here. Just a small amount, which is pretty nice. Okay, I'll pull it back a little bit further because you can still see like a little bit of shadow in the corner there. So I'm just pulling it back very slightly, which means I'll also need to increase the strength of it because I've pulled the distance away. And that's pretty good. Get a drink here. I accidentally left my tea bag in my cup again for 25 minutes while I was recording that. So that's undrinkable. Now looking at this, it's pretty good. It's almost there, but I know looking at this that these shadows are a little bit too heavy. I don't want to increase this light over here necessarily, although I could. And one thing I could actually do is maybe just rotate it just very slightly to the front. So getting just a little bit more, like cutting into the shadow, just a little bit more. But what I want to do instead is I'll make another area lamp area, and I'll position it above the scene, just casting light directly down onto it. So I'll remove everything else, and I'll make this very big. Let's go, I don't know, 10 or 20 or something like that. Increase this, and I'll keep the color as white. And this is really just like a booster light, just to sort of take the edge off some of the shadows so it's not so contrasted. And I'll maybe move it just to the right a little bit so it's hitting the shadow a little bit more, and then I'll bring back everything else. Okay, so now it has just a slightly more, like the shadows are a little less dark. And that's sort of the effect that I wanted, which is good. Maybe increase the size of it. Let's hide everything else again. That's pretty good. All right, so that was an example of how you could create a lighting scene for this. Now, every object is different. Absolutely everything. If you're making a car, if you're making a character, it's all different. And lighting has such a huge impact on your scene, and the end thing that it's something you want to spend a while tweaking and experimenting with. So definitely do that. Now, I actually have 2 tutorials that you might want to check out for helping you create lighting scenes. So the first one is Mastering Lighting, I believe it's called. It's this one. I'll put it on the screen. So watch that, and that'll walk you through, different, like how painters have used lighting and sort of like the theory of lighting. So check that out if you're interested. And then I did another tutorial on lighting characters, which can also, like, there's a bunch of fundamental stuff in that, even if you're not doing characters as well. So that is lighting. We have finished. We've got some nice lighting across our scene now. Now, I did mention at the start, as a final thing to end off on, let's do something fun, completely unrelated, and let's make our donut look like it's fit for the underground donut racing scene by giving it some neon underlighting. So, yeah, let's do that. So first of all, and this is a good habit to get into anyway, put your lighting on one layer by itself. And I also like to do that with the camera. So I just take everything and I generally use this layer down here, which is the layer just underneath the first layer. You can use whatever layer you want. It's not really that important, but I like to just so that I remember it, it's always on the same one. So I put it down there. So now that I've done that, and also this part of this tutorial, making this neon light, it also gives me an excuse to mention another feature of Blender, or another technique, I guess, a common thing that you might want to use, which is to give more than one material to an object. So we've got this donut here, right? This donut underneath, not the icing, but the donut. And let's say I wanted to make this ring around the bottom here. I want to make that the neon light, the underglow of the light there. But I want to make the rest of it still look like it's this donut, right? So just this part here, the glow. Well, what you can do is you can give you can create another material underneath the main one that you have. And if I call this one neon, or you don't have to name it, and then I set the surface just like before for creating mesh lighting. If I set this to emission, it's now an emission, but you'll notice that nothing is happening, right? Because it's still using by default the first material that we have, which is this donut. So what we need to do is if we define which parts of our mesh we want to have this material. So if I select this ring down here, which I've done by holding down Alt and then just clicking, if I select that ring of faces around the bottom there, then I select the material, the second material, I can hit assign. Okay, you can only do this in edit mode. If you can see, if you're in object mode, you won't see those functions. So in edit mode, I hit assign. And now if I hit Shift Z, you'll see that mesh light is now contributing light to the scene. And this is another thing as well. I haven't mentioned this before either, but like if you wanted to see which parts of the mesh had different materials without going into rendered mode, because that can sometimes be costly, like you should be able to see in the viewport the different colors of your material. And the reason everything is white at the moment is that the default viewport color for every material is white. But if you click and then drag down and drag that to the viewport, you can see that you can actually make, in the viewport, you can give your materials the right color. I can do that for every material. So I can select the icing, drag that down, and that now becomes pink. I could do it for everything. I could make the wood. Actually, I can't see the wood. Maybe I'll just make it what? Hey, I wanted to use the eyedropper. There we go. Make that a sort of a wood color like that. But anyways, that's just so now you can see that because this donut has that yellow color, this bottom ring around it is white. So I know that that's the part that now has the neon light to it. So now that I've done that, and I just want to make this ring around the center there, I want to give that the same light. So I've selected that ring and I'm going to hit assign there as well. And let's give this a hot pink color. So there I know. Okay, cool. And now I'll change for the emission, not the viewport, but for the actual light in the render, I'm going to make that a pink, and let's crank that up. And there you go. Haha. Put on some exhibit. Make a little animation out of it. Do whatever you want with it. That's something silly to end with. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like. Otherwise, you can go ahead and join me for part 9, where we'll be talking about creating the final render. Thanks for watching.